Right. Well, I think, to be respectful of everybody's time, we're going to just go ahead and jump right in. So, again, thank you for joining us for our Fair Housing Essentials, a Realtor's Guide to Fair Housing, presented by Homeownership OC and in partnership with the North San Diego County Realtors. We've been working with this Realtors Association for quite a few years, and we appreciate their partnership and am happy to bring this information to you. So, a little bit of information about Homeownership OC and myself. My name's Connie Dertrosian. I'm the Executive Director of Homeownership OC, also a HUD certified housing counselor. And I've been working in the nonprofit housing counseling field and working with the real estate industries for almost 25 years now. And I have extensive experience providing training, education, developing homebuyer programs as well, and a lot of information in regards to real estate and providing education to realtors on various topics. So, for more information, we are a nonprofit HUD approved housing counseling agency, which means we work with the public to educate them on fair housing information, as well as getting them ready for homeownership. You can go to our website at homeownershipoc.org to find out more information. Give us a call at 714-204-2314 or shoot me an email. Happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, if you have questions throughout the workshop, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. So, Homeownership OC has been around since 2007, since that big housing crisis time. And as I said, we are a nonprofit, HUD-approved housing counseling agency. Our mission is to promote and preserve the dream of homeownership, and we do that through outreach, education, counseling, and financing. We've had really strong partnerships with the local realtor associations, HUD, FHA, the Department of the DFPI, many of the regulatory agencies. So we like to educate you all so you're on top of the information. So you can also, in turn, educate your clients, stay in compliance, and then also take advantage of some of the educational and counseling resources that we provide. We've done almost 400 housing events and workshops, educating over 30,000 individuals. So we educate them on the home ownership process, improving credit, foreclosure prevention, rental topics, as well as avoiding real estate scams and fraud. So all of our services are provided free. So you as realtors, if you do have individuals who need help with their credit, need to get their home buyer certificate for down payment programs, or they need help or have questions about home buying or foreclosure or fair housing, or rental questions, feel free to send them on over to us. We do partner with the Fair Housing Foundation, which is our local fair housing agency. And sometimes when clients have questions or realtors have questions, we'll send them over to our partner at Fair Housing Foundation or the other local fair housing organizations that are around. So we like to work in partnership with them, and it's a collaborative environment. And sometimes questions come up that we haven't heard before, or you've got clients who need help, and we can certainly help them with that. So, how can we help? As I said, we provide free credit and budget counseling, rental counseling, of course, fair housing education, like we're doing today, home buyer counseling, and down payment assistance. We are familiar with all of the down payment assistance programs that are available throughout California. And the certificate that we provide in our home buyer education allows you to qualify for any kind of down payment assistance program or first time buyer loans. And that's anywhere throughout the United States. So they could take that certificate and go anywhere essentially. But our counselors are really very well versed in the various bank programs, um, the city of San Diego, the county, and different down payment assistance programs that are through the city or local governments. We know about pretty much all of them and the qualifications, so we can help your clients qualify for those down payment programs as well. Of course, we do also provide foreclosure prevention, loan modification counseling. So if you run into a client who's having trouble making his payments and they want to see if they could qualify for a loan mod, we can help with that as well. Real estate scams and fraud. Since we started in 2007, that was a big time for scams and fraud. So we work with the local district attorney's office, the FBI, the FTC in reporting scams and fraud, and we try to help unravel those issues. So sometimes we report people to the Department of Real Estate. It just depends. But we really try to help the client. So if you do run into those issues, feel free to send those clients over to us, or feel free to contact us as well if you have questions. All our services are provided at no cost, and you can go to our website at homeownershipoc.org for more information. If you have a client who's looking for these services, you can just have them fill out our online intake form, and we'll be happy to assist them. All right, so let's jump into our fair housing presentation today. So there are federal protections and then there's state protections. So under the Federal Fair Housing Act, we are all protected due to our race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, which means the presence of children under the age of 18 in the home, as well as disability. So disability can be any kind of physical or mental impairment, which substantially limits a major life activity. Um, so it could be actual physical, like they're in a wheelchair, or it could be, maybe they have anxiety or they need an emotional support animal due to their anxiety. That would be protections under disability. All right. Under California, so California has its own protections. We like to say it's a little bit more expanded under fair housing laws. So it includes all of those protections under the federal fair housing laws, as well as sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, marital status, medical condition, ancestry, source of income, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail. That's a fairly new one that was added, I think, in 2020, as well as age, military and veteran status, citizenship, genetic information, as well as arbitrary discrimination. So arbitrary discrimination could be something that's just, say for instance, landlord says, hey, I don't like people who have tattoos, and I'm not going to rent to anybody that walks in because they're all gang members. Anybody who has a tattoo is a gang member. That would be a form of arbitrary discrimination. So we have the federal fair housing laws as well as the California fair housing laws, which are much more expansive, and we'll do a little deeper dive into some of these. I'm sure you're all familiar with the federal and California fair housing laws, but if you do have questions about any of those, because sometimes it does come up, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So under the Federal Fair Housing Act and other fair housing laws, they collectively prohibit discrimination in nearly all housing transactions in residential settings. So that would include rental housing, of course, purchasing and selling housing, but it also includes insuring housing or appraising housing, lending for housing, lending and credit, I should say, nursing homes, permanent shelters, and other places where people live and receive services together. So it's pretty all-encompassing, and I know HUD's been doing a big push for appraisals. They found, there's been some discrimination happening in appraising of housing, and we'll go into a little bit more detail a little later on in the presentation about that. But that's something that definitely you as realtors can be on the lookout for if it's the appraisal seems unusually low, and you think, you may need to appeal that, or because it's based on one of those protected classes, that's sometimes where the realtor will come up to us and say, hey, this doesn't seem right. What would I do in regards to this situation? And we would connect you with some of the fair housing regulatory agencies to take a look at it. So what is discrimination? Housing discrimination means blocking someone's access to housing, treating a buyer or renter differently based on those protected classes, or denying someone the right to buy or rent a home even though they can afford the property, all because that person is a member of one of those protected classes under the federal and state fair housing laws. So it's really important, to make sure that you have policies and procedures that kind of treat all people equally, and that way you can't be, accused of discriminating in housing. Because a lot of times it just may be falling through the cracks, right? So, making sure your policies and procedures are up to date and keeping with them in how you treat individuals will help you avoid any kind of fair housing complaint. So, what are the prohibited acts under the fair housing laws? Refusing to sell, lend, rent, or lease housing, representing that a dwelling is unavailable for inspection, sale, or rental when it's available, providing different terms, conditions, privileges, facilities, or services, or canceling or terminating a home sale, loan, credit application, or rental agreement, again, based on those protected classes. Refusing to provide reasonable accommodations or allow reasonable modifications to a disabled person. Making threats, intimidation, harassment, coercion, or making unlawful inquiries. Those would be prohibited acts under the Federal Fair Housing Act. So now when it comes to real estate and fair housing, many of the same things apply. So refusing to sell or rent or denying a person housing based on their characteristics, refusing to negotiate the terms of the sale or lease with someone based on their protected characteristics, discriminatory advertising, making statements or using advertisements that suggest a preference or limitation based on a protected class. A lot of times we see, discriminatory ads where you're trying to describe the property, but it may inadvertently be looked at as discriminatory. So say, for instance, if you say right down the street from a Catholic church, St. John's Catholic Church, it could infer that, this is property that we like to market to those, individuals who go to that church. So it's always best when looking at advertising that you're describing the property, the benefits, the true aspects of the property, not the people who live there or things that around there that may be considered steering people or targeting a specific group. Redlining is also a form of discrimination, and that's where you're refusing to provide services in certain areas based on the racial or ethnic makeup of the area. We saw a lot of this in insurance, where, they basically would take a red line and say, hey, we're not going to insure in this particular neighborhood because it's very low income, very minority. Um, and it used to happen quite a while ago, but still does happen today as well. Failure to provide equal access, denying someone equal access to housing or services based on those protected characteristics. So that would be some of the examples of real estate and fair housing. So again, treating members of a protected class differently um, could be construed as discrimination, such as lying or exaggerating sales or rental terms. We've seen instances where Hispanic realtors will take advantage of Hispanic buyers and tell them, oh, hey, I'll go out and show you properties, but you're going to have to give me $5,000 up front. Um, and basically, took their $5,000, showed them some properties, and then they were long gone. So it could be something like that, or they're asking for money outside of escrow. Of course, those are always big red flags, right? Um, Failing to inform buyers about all listings that may be available, stalling to avoid showing a home, or perhaps steering buyers to certain neighborhoods. So, for instance, in Orange County where I'm located, we have a area in Westminster called Little Saigon. So let's say you have a Vietnamese family and they want to see, houses in another area in Irvine, but the realtor will say, "Oh, but don't you think you'd be more comfortable in Westminster where there's more, Vietnamese restaurants and things like that?" That could be a form of steering. So it may not be intentional, it may be unintentional, but that could be seen as a form of steering. So you should really let the you know, individual who you're showing properties kind of figure out what are the areas that they want to see and not steer them into certain neighborhoods. Another example would be, a realtor telling a family that you wouldn't be comfortable in this neighborhood because it's just for professional adults. So, professional infers they don't have children, or it could infer that they don't have children. So, again, you want to stay away from, describing the people that are at that particular property or in that particular neighborhood and let the clients go and do their investigations all on their own, right? To make sure that you're not accused of steering anybody to any particular neighborhood. There's also what's called unintentional bias, and we're having a really great discussion about that. In that, realtors may think they're trying to do the right thing, um, but it may actually um, bite them in the back, so to speak, by trying to do the right thing. So, unintentional bias refers to attitudes, stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So, it could be rooted in your upbringing, cultural environment, past experiences, and it can lead to unintended discriminatory behavior. So, in housing, unintentional bias can manifest itself in various ways, leading to unequal access to housing opportunities. So, I was having a discussion with a few realtors a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, I had a buyer who was a veteran who said, I am going to I want to sell my house to another veteran, and told the realtor, this is what I want, right? And so, of course, we want that. We want our veterans to be able to have access to housing and all of that. But you can't just say, "Oh, I'm not going to look at any of the other offers that come in, and just pick the person who's the veteran." So, although he was trying to do a good thing, they can't. You can't necessarily do that. You should be looking at all offers and evaluating them equally. And again, it goes back to the policies and procedures that you help set up for your client to make sure that they're not violating any fair housing laws, and nevertheless, inviting you to violate some fair housing laws. Because what I will say is that many of the fair housing groups that we work with, they have testers who go out there and test properties, and they will send two people out to, to see how are they treated differently, are they treated the same, are they shown the same properties, that kind of thing. So they are out there and they do test properties. So if you're doing everything, it should not be a problem. So how can unintentional bias impact fair housing? Of course, steering, we talked a little bit about that, steering them to potential neighborhoods, or away from certain neighborhoods, and I know a lot of times it comes down to affordability, but really, well, all the time it comes down to affordability, right? Here in California, it's expensive, right? So, but we want to stay away from steering people to certain neighborhoods or steering them away from certain neighborhoods as well, based on their perceived preferences or limiting their housing choice. We want them to have choices in where they want to live. Differential treatment. So agents might unconsciously provide different levels of service or enthusiasm to clients based on their race, ethnicity, or their protected class. Lending discrimination. Mortgage lenders might unconsciously discriminate against certain groups based on biases related to credit worthiness or neighborhood demographics. And I'll tell you, a lot of times what we see is individuals in the Vietnamese, Hispanic communities taking advantage of the lack of language, right, and understanding of the contracts, to uh, take advantage of the situation, charge them higher fees, charge them money outside of escrow, really take advantage of them in the lending process. So if you see things like that, it's important that you inform your clients and encourage them to report it. As a lot of times we'll have the realtors that we're working with call us up and say, hey, this happened to my client, and we'll help them with, um, investigating the situation, or filing a fair housing complaint, because a lot of times it's the realtor who sees it. Again, in appraisal bias, home appraisers might unconsciously undervalue homes in minority or diverse neighborhoods due to ingrained biases or stereotypes. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but like I said, when HUD's been doing a lot of information and webinars surrounding the appraisal bias, and found that a lot of the appraisers were discriminating depending on, the property. There was one up north in Northern California where a Black family, was refining their house, had to get an appraisal, had a lot of, pictures of themselves, Black art, this and that, and had the appraiser come in and do the appraisal. And, she was like, this is like, really, the appraisal came in and it was about $200,000 lower than what she had expected. So she just felt like something was off. So she asked her neighbor she said, I'm going to get another appraisal. I'm going to whitewash my house, and I'm going to have my neighbor who's white, meet the appraiser and have the appraiser do the appraisal. And sure enough, when she did that, the appraisal came in, I think, $250,000 higher than what it was initially. So, and in those situations, a lot of times it's the realtor who's going to notice these kind of things, right? So, in that case, they ended up filing a fair housing complaint with the Fair Housing Agency and settled the case, but it really brought to light kind of the situation of, it probably wasn't, on the radar of the individual who was the appraiser, but, there was probably some unintentional bias in that situation. But oftentimes it may be the realtor who is the person who's recognizing this and encouraging the client to file a complaint. Also, in advertising, AI-driven advertising algorithms might unintentionally exclude certain demographics from seeing certain housing ads, leading to discriminatory outcomes. And I know the National Fair Housing Alliance is doing a lot of work in regards to that, the AI, the advertising, as well as mortgage applications, scrutinizing mortgage applications too. Um, and we'll talk about some of that in our later on in the discussion when we talk about some of the recent cases, fair housing cases that have been out there. So unintentional bias, what can you do? You can, of course, educate yourself. So what you're doing today, so good job in doing that. Engage in training and workshops so you understand really fair housing laws and the impact of an unintentional bias. Do some self-reflection, examine your own biases, assumptions. And like I said, sometimes you're trying to do the right thing, but it may unintentionally look like discrimination. So really take a look at that. Standardizing your processes, implementing objective and consistent procedures in tenant screening, client communication, property evaluation can really help to minimize process biases. So standardize those processes, treat everyone gets the same treatment no matter who you are. There's utilize bias reducing technology, using AI and machine learning tools carefully and with oversight to make sure that all housing opportunities are presented fairly to everyone. And of course, promoting diversity and inclusion, creating inclusive environments with real estate organizations, and advocating for policy changes that promote fair housing are very important steps. So I like this little example that we have here. That kind of shows the difference between explicit bias versus implicit bias. So, explicit bias means it's expressed directly. You're aware of the bias, operates consciously. So, example will be a sign in the window that just says whites only. That's explicit bias. Whereas implicit bias is really expressed indirectly. You're unaware of the bias and it operates subconsciously. So an example of this is a property manager doing more criminal background checks on African Americans than its white tenants or potential tenants. So that gives you kind of a really good example of what explicit versus implicit bias is. And really, as I said, standardizing the processes and treating everybody fairly, educating yourself is really important. So you're doing that today. So I congratulate you for doing that. Can really help with that unintentional bias. All right. So, of course, we talked a lot about, rental and buying and selling property, but of course, in mortgage, there's also discrimination that can happen in the mortgage process. So it may be scrutinizing one loan application more closely than another. As I said, giving an unreasonably low appraisal or imposing different loan terms or conditions based on that person's membership in a protected class, or denying loans in certain neighborhoods, redlining, or targeting borrowers based on a protected class, Spanish speakers only. Um, as I said, I think, there's a lot of discrimination that happens within individual communities where the Spanish speaking realtors will take advantage of the Spanish speaking clients or Vietnamese, um, you know, they're Arabic as well. So, because, they just don't know any better. So oftentimes it may be that the, realtor or somebody who's working in the transaction will be the ones to spot this type of discrimination. But if you do hear about these types of discrimination or somebody getting charged exorbitant amounts of fees, let's say in the lending process, it's important, to report those folks. or encourage the client to report those folks, or at least at minimum, go seek, funding from another, or approval from another lender. We usually tell our clients when they're out shopping, once we get them mortgage ready, we say go to three. It's a good idea to go to three. And I know a lot of people just work with one, and that's great. But you know what? If they really are giving the person the best deal, then they'll be able to show it on paper, right? So they can see, hey, this person really is getting the best deal with this particular lender. Those are some examples of lending discrimination. Again, it would be refusing to provide information regarding mortgage loans, steering applicants toward a bad or inferior mortgage loan product, imposing different terms or conditions on a mortgage loan, different interest rates, points, fees. As I said, we've had clients who have come in and, he was purchasing a property and he showed us his loan estimate, and on there was a fee of $5,000 for a termite inspection. So, as you all know, inspections, I don't know if they are in San Diego, but here they're free. The inspection is free. So it was basically a $5,000 junk fee. Um, so luckily, the client was questioning it, came to us, and we were able to explain it. And we said, go back, tell them you're not paying that fee, or go find another lender. So a lot of times there can be junk fees that are added on in there. And, there's reasonable fees, of course, but when clients are looking for a mortgage application or going out to get qualified, it's important that they're able, we tell them, go to a couple of them so you can look and see what are they charging you? What are those fees? And we go over their loan estimate to make sure that there are no, crazy fees in there or unnecessary fees. Another type of lending discrimination would be unnecessarily requiring a cosigner, approving or denying loans based on a protected class, providing inferior servicing of a mortgage loan. So also once they get the loan, then providing inferior servicing of that loan. Providing more invasive or burdensome disability income documentation requirements. If a person is on disability, you got to treat their disability income just like you would any other individual. So, if the ratios are the same for this, or you ask for 1 year documentation of it, or 2 years documentation, you have to ask for 2 years documentation for everybody, right? We've also seen some cases in the past regarding denying loans to pregnant women who are going on maternity leave and saying, oh, you can't qualify until you go back to work, requiring them to go back to work in order to qualify for the loan. Well, that would be a form of discrimination. Okay, so like I said, if you guys run into this or see this, it's important to get more fair housing information and maybe contact us or your local fair housing agency to find out more information. And see, is it really discriminatory? Sometimes it's just a matter of educating them on the laws, right? And if they're able to abide by it, great. And maybe they just need to do a little bit more training. But if they don't, it could end up in some heavy fines if they get dinged with the fair housing complaint. So important information, and important information for you to share with your clients as well. All right, we're rolling right along. We are gonna take a break in a few minutes, just so that because I know these workshops go on for a few hours. We may need to stretch our legs and take a drink of water here. So again, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Be happy to answer your questions for you. And we will move right along and take a break in about 5 minutes here. All right, there's a couple different types of lending discrimination. We talked a little bit about it. So overt discrimination would just be openly or intentionally discriminating on a protected class, like, hey, we don't lend to single women, you got to have a husband here. So actually, one of my directors was her first loan. When she went to go apply for her first loan, she was told, sorry, honey, you can't, you can't get a loan here unless you have a husband. So, she's like, what? Of course, this was a while ago, but it does happen. So that would be a form of overt discrimination or discriminating that, based on their protected class. Um, Disparate treatment means members of a protected group are treated differently than others, and it can be unintentional. So let's say, for example, a lender has a pricing discretion that results in white applicants receiving better pricing than Asian applicants. That would be a form of disparate treatment. Redlining is also a form of disparate treatment. It's where a lender provides unequal access to or terms of credit because of the protected characteristics of the residence or where the property is located. So it may violate both the Fair Housing Act and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which we're going to go over in just a couple of minutes. So that would be a form of disparate treatment. Like I said, that's more of you know, the policies, procedures, the way you're doing business is unintentionally discriminating against a certain group. And I know like the National Fair Housing Alliance is looking at these online applications with lending and, wanting to make sure that they're providing fair and, you know, fair treatment to everybody who's applying, um, and making sure there's, safeguards in regards to that. So those rules and policies could have a disparate impact, which means it occurs when an otherwise neutral policy or practice has the unintended consequence of creating a disproportionately adverse impact on protected classes of people, even if that policy or practice is applied equally. So they may not have wanted it to they were doing it to try to open it up to everyone, but the impact of it is that it's actually um, impacting a certain group of individuals. So it's a little bit harder to prove these kind of cases, but there are a lot of groups out there that may be taking HMDA data and things like that to see, um, are these companies' policies having a disparate impact or treating individuals differently in regards to their policies and procedures. All right. There's also can be discrimination in foreclosures, which means refusing to provide the same forbearance or loan workout terms to all protected classes. Providing less favorable loss mitigation terms to certain protected classes. That could be also a form of discrimination in dealing with foreclosures. Denying forbearance or workout options to certain protected classes. Failing to explain available foreclosure prevention policies to certain protected classes, or harsher collection or foreclosure practices because of the race, national origin, of the borrower or residents in the surrounding neighborhood. So, yeah, a lot of times clients will come to us for help with getting their loan workout, and they may speak English as their second language. So there's a hard time communicating with the lender or understanding what exactly they're asking them to do, provide documentation. So they do have to make sure that they're providing all of their foreclosure prevention, policies, procedures, and options available to all protected classes equally. All right. I think before we jump into the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, I think we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We're going to take, let's say, a 10-minute break. So let's come back in 10 minutes. Let's go stretch our legs and grab a glass of water and come back in 10 minutes. And then we'll jump back into the second half of our workshop today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. All right, so we're gonna jump back in here. I'll give everybody a minute to join back in. I did put my contact information in the chat box, so feel free to take that down, save it. If you do have any questions that pop up later on, any instances, feel free to reach out to us. We are a resource for you. Happy to provide any information or just answer a question if you have one. Or, anything that has to, in regards to home buying as well. All right, hopefully y'all had a great little break. I know I needed that because I'm doing a lot of talking here. So, we're going to pop back into our presentation here. Again, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer some questions and break things up here a little bit as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So ECOA, as we like to call it, is a federal law that makes credit discrimination illegal and holds lenders responsible if they break the law. It prohibits lenders from discriminating based on all of those protected classes that we discussed earlier. The federal protected classes: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, which includes sexual orientation and gender identity, marital status, age, provided the applicant has the capability, the capacity to sign a contract. The fact that all or part of the applicant's income derives from public assistance or programs, that would be source of income, right? And the fact that the applicant has in good faith exercised any right under the Consumer Credit Protection Act. So, what does this mean? It means when you're applying for credit or your clients are applying for credit, could be for a credit card, could be for a car, could be for a home loan, that they're protected under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And marital status is some places where we see some discrimination in regards to this, like, telling somebody, oh, because you're divorced, and when you don't have your husband's income, you're not going to qualify. So it should just be based on not on their marital status, right? Or they could get the income from another source of income, right? So you want to be really careful in regards to that. Or if your clients happen to mention, they've gotten denied credit or they've asked, for that those kind of situations may come up, could be a possible fair housing violation. So again, the fact that all or part of the applicant's income derives from public assistance program or disability, a lot of times where you're treating individuals differently based on that source of income. When we talk about our fair housing cases that are coming up, the recent cases that we're going to go over, a lot of them have to do with source of income. So just remember, if a person is on disability or they get public assistance and it's regular steady income, you have to treat it like regular steady income going forward, right? Just as if somebody had a job or was getting their income from some other way. It has to be treated the same way. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. So, what does ECOA apply to? Loans and credit. So, as I said, it could be a car loan, credit cards, home loans, student loans, business loans, personal loans. From the time the person applies for credit or a loan to when the account is closed, the person is protected from discrimination. It may also apply if the person is discouraged from applying for credit. So it basically ECOA covers all types of lending, home loans, but encompasses pretty much any type of loan you might get for a car, um, education, business loans, whatever it may be. Some examples of lending or credit discrimination are rejecting a credit application based on the consumer's protected characteristic, changing the credit terms or conditions based on that protected class, or asking if a consumer receives alimony, child support, or separate maintenance payments. Um, that might be construed as discrimination. Um, Asking if a consumer is widowed or divorced, another form of discrimination, or asking for information about a consumer's spouse, like where, the spouse's income. Could also include refusing to consider public assistance income the same way as you're treating any other type of income, or offering credit with a higher rate than they applied for, even though they qualify for the lower rate based on advertised requirements. So those are some examples of lending and credit discrimination. I think again, when it goes back to the income, and uh, what we tell our individuals who come to us and when they're trying to qualify for a home loan is, it's based on your income, and what the income you give us is what we're going to base it on, wherever that income is derived from. So all lenders should be treating income, the income based on wherever it's coming from, and as long as it's documented the same way, whether it's coming from alimony, child support, disability, public assistance, whatever it may be. So familial status is also one of those protected classes, and it's defined as having one or more individuals under the age of 18 who reside with a parent or another person with legal custody, which includes foster parents, or anyone who that parent designates as a person with legal custody. It also includes pregnant women or a person who is adopting or otherwise securing custody of an individual under the age of 18. So it's important to, if you are going to have rules, policies, procedures, that you apply them to everyone equally, enforce those rules consistently. If it is specific to the children, it should be based on the health and safety and must address the health and safety issue. So some examples, I mean, a lot with the renting apartments or leasing apartments, we see a lot of issues with familial status. One is blatantly refusing to rent to families with children, saying, oh, the place is too small, can't rent to individuals, if you have kids. So there are occupancy standards, and we can go over that in more detail if you have questions about it. Or let's say you're working with somebody, a client who you're renting out, a studio apartment, and they're like, well, this place is just too small. Well, there are some examples of building and safety codes that we can go over with them to kind of explain the process, but you can't just blatantly say no families with children. Um, Steering families with children to certain neighborhoods or certain parts of the complex, like, hey, we put all the kids back there in the back of the complex because we don't want to hear them running around. That would be a form of discrimination. Or they don't want to rent to families with kids on the second floor because kids are noisy and all of that. So That could be a form of discrimination. Again, you're steering people to certain parts of the property. You have to show them everything that's available, and if they want the upstairs apartment, you got to give it to them if they qualify for it. Now, if there's noise issues, that's a whole separate thing, and you would deal with that with your policies and procedures, right? Just like if there was an adult up there making noise. So important to apply your rules and policies, procedures equally to everyone and enforce those rules consistently. Um, we had a fair housing case where there was a property manager giving out fines to the kids for bouncing a ball or riding their bike and having them, the tenants pay cash to her. Um, and they ended up filing a fair housing complaint, and a person got fired. Of course, when we found out she had a gambling problem, that's how she was. But she was just making these unrealistic rules for all the kids in the property, and you can't be doing that. So important that you're treating everyone equally and enforcing the rules and policies and procedures, um, equally amongst everyone. Adults only, like I said, professionals only, could be code words for, hey, we don't allow kids here. So you want to stay away from that in any of your marketing of the, properties and things that you're working with. Sources of income protections. So as I said, this went into effect back in January 2020 and prohibits landlords from discriminating against tenants with housing subsidies paid to landlords on behalf of the tenant. So that public assistance includes federal, state, or local public assistance, federal, state, or local housing subsidies, so Section 8, any kind of rental assistance that may be available. Landlords may still require that the tenant applicant meet all other terms of the selection criteria, but they have to treat the source of income the same. So we're going to go, types of rental assistance programs. Of course, most everybody has heard of the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher. There's also the HUD VASH vouchers, which are specific Section 8 vouchers for veterans. Homeless prevention, rapid rehousing programs, the HOPA, the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, security deposit assistance programs, and locally funded subsidy programs created by cities, counties, public agencies to address homelessness, as well as emergency rental assistance. Those would be the types of rental assistance programs available. Excuse me. So a lot of questions come up when it comes to minimum income requirements and vouchers. So you can have income requirements as it relates to vouchers. So you can require that the applicant meet an income threshold based on the rent for a particular unit for the applicant to qualify to rent that unit. So a lot of times the applicant must have a monthly rent of at least 3 times the rent. However, if the applicant is a voucher holder or getting some type of rental assistance, that income threshold must be based on the amount of the rent that would be paid by the tenant, not the total rent. Okay. So, for example, the landlord requires 3 times the rent. The rent is $2,000, but the tenant's portion is only $300 of that $2,000. Then the landlord can only require the tenant to have a monthly income of $900 a month in legally verifiable income. So I know a lot of questions come up in regards to this and making sure that individuals meet the standards. So again, it goes back to if you are in that property management space or leasing space, you can't just out and out say, hey, we don't accept individuals with vouchers, right? Um, So, and if they do come with a voucher, you can't say, oh, you've got to make 3 times the rent. Well, no, we're not going to take into account that this person, um, gets some kind of rental subsidy. You would have to take that into account as far as treating their income the same. Um, what you can require is, that they make 3 times the portion of their amount that's going to be required of them, and whatever the other requirements as well. So again, if you have questions about this, it's not a problem to reach out. You want to help with coming up with a policy to make sure that it doesn't violate any kind of fair housing. It's always better to reach out, ask the questions, and make sure you get the answer to those questions, prior to putting something in writing and possibly, violating some kind of fair housing law unintentionally. But again, source of income is a protected class under the state of California, so you got to make sure you're not treating these individuals differently than you would have any other um, qualified individual. So as I said, when if you're in that property management space and you're looking at rental applications, you've got to just look at them all the same and say, our policy is this, you know. So we had a situation where a realtor was looking at a individual who had a voucher, um, but something happened with the credit report, and actually I think, oh, they had to pay for their own credit report, and their payment for the credit report didn't go through. So they're like, oh, hey, they're discriminating against me because I have a Section 8 voucher. And actually, that was not the case at all. It was the fact that the payment didn't go through for the credit, um, which that's their requirement, is we're going to still run credit on you. Um, and we're going to make sure that you have the income that you say you have, even if you have a voucher. So, certain circumstances like that can come up, but as long as you have your policies and procedures in place, you'll be protecting yourself as well in those types of situations. Also, in criminal history screenings, what can landlords or property management firms do? You can conduct background checks, check a prospective tenant's criminal history, as long as you're doing that amongst all of them, right? You can consider relevant convictions. You can consider the nature and the seriousness of the crime, the time elapsed, and any mitigating factors when making those decisions. You can also demonstrate a link to tenant suitability. If denying a rental application based on a criminal conviction, they must demonstrate a direct link between the conviction and a risk to the safety of the residents at the property, or concern about the tenant's ability to fulfill their financial obligations. So you can do background checks. Nobody's saying you can't. You just, if you're going to do it on one, you're going to have to do it on all. So you're going to have that policy that we do criminal background checks on everybody. What can you not do? You cannot implement blanket bans. So you can't have a policy that prohibits anyone with a criminal record from renting, regardless of their circumstances. You can't consider arrests without convictions. You can't discriminate based on race or other protected classes, or use their criminal history information in any way that has a disproportionately negative impact on certain protected groups. You cannot discriminate based on age. So, that's another protected class. And you can't consider convictions older than 7 years. In California, the California law generally prohibits using convictions older than 7 years when making a rental decision. So that's some information in regards to criminal histories and screenings. As I said, you can do them. You just have to apply your policies and procedures equally amongst everyone and, do that consistently with everyone. So disabled individuals are also protected in the renting and buying of property. Disability is defined as any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Life activities could be walking, seeing, hearing, all of that. And disabled individuals have the right to make reasonable modifications and be granted reasonable accommodations in order to get full use and enjoyment of the housing. So, landlords, property managers, real estate brokers, home sellers, mortgage companies, banks may not refuse to deal with you or treat you differently because of your income includes sources of income other than wages, like disability income. There's an example as a disabled veteran was required to provide information verifying the permanency of her Social Security and VA disability benefits for the next 3 years, but this was not required of other individuals who were refinancing their property. They just required 2 years. So you can't have a policy where, oh, well, because you're on disability and you're getting disability benefits from the VA, we want 3 years of that. And then say everyone else we want 2 years. So that could be a form of discrimination. So what is a reasonable accommodation and what's the difference between an accommodation and a modification? So a reasonable accommodation would be a change in a housing provider's rules, policies, and services, whereas a modification is a physical modification of existing structure. So accommodations are accommodating individuals due to their disability, whereas a modification is actually modifying the property or the structure. So some examples of that may be assisting an applicant with a developmental disability in completing a standard application, or we just had a client who is a veteran and was partially blind and needed help with an application. So they can ask for help with an application, or can you allow somebody to help them fill out the application? Give them, additional time to fill out the application because of their disability. That may be something, granting them an accommodation. Um, Permitting a tenant with a caregiver to transfer from one bedroom unit to a two-bedroom unit. And they would put this in writing if they needed this kind of accommodation. Installing ramps or grab bars, maybe one of those um, stair lifts, things like that. Removing carpet might be an example of a modification, or providing a visual alarm for a person with a hearing impairment, or an auditory alarm for a person with vision impairment. So if you get a request for an accommodation or a modification, you do have to consider it. You can ask for a doctor's note to verify that they do have a disability. You cannot ask, what is your disability? Well, you don't look disabled. You can't say things like that, but you can verify and actually require a doctor's note if they need this disability or they need this accommodation or modification due to their disability. So that can be documented. And I know a lot of questions arise in regards to service animals and a lot of individuals who may have mental disabilities, maybe, trying to bring in a pet to help with their anxiety, depression, or whatever it may be. If they have a doctor's note and you have a no pet policy, you do have to accommodate them as just think of that service animal as a cane or a walker or whatever they need it because of their disability. But you can, require them to have a doctor's note to prove that they need that for their disability as well. And as far as pet rent, like, we're not charging them pet rent because this is something that they need because of their disability. All right. So any questions in regards to any of all of that we have covered? I know we're covering a lot of information. Um, we're going to jump into to some of the recent cases um, that we've heard about and kind of what's happening out there in the industry. So again, if you have questions, feel free. Always here to be a resource for you, and there's nothing wrong with reaching out and asking a question or getting clarification on something. Um, and we've got plenty of time here, so we're running good on time. So there was a mass discrimination complaint from the Housing Rights Initiative that was in LA. They filed 112 complaints against 203 defendants, including some major real estate companies, for discriminating against families with the housing choice vouchers. This case was one of the largest discrimination cases in California history. And as I said, I think source of income is where we've been seeing a lot of that happening. And I think there's a lot of confusion in regards to it too, because even sometimes I'll have to call Fair Housing and ask them, like, what about in this circumstances? Because there's a lot of um, scenarios that may come up. But again, you just got to make sure that you have a policy for Section 8 vouchers or any kind of rental assistance programs, and that you're treating those individuals the same as you would any other individual, right? Treating it like income. As long as it's verifiable, it's showing, if you say you got to show proof that you've received this for this amount of time, and you got to treat it just like income. Um, so that was a big one that was just recently settled, I think, in 2024. Disability discrimination, the California Civil Rights Department secured a $40,000 settlement in San Diego with a case involving disability rights. Again, those reasonable accommodations and modifications, a lot of questions come up in regards to that. So you want to make sure, you're protecting yourself if somebody's asking you for an accommodation or a modification. They also recently settled a case with the owners and operators of Sutter's Village, a federally funded apartment complex, requiring them to take steps to ensure equal access to housing for people with disabilities at over 200 properties. And I think that one had to do with the elevator breaking down and then them not fixing it. And there was somebody with a wheelchair who was up, one of the top floors and couldn't go up and down. And so, again, that they're out there and they're testing properties and they will receive complaints, so you want to make sure you're abiding by the laws. There's also Inner City Law filed a mass civil rights complaint against real estate agents and landlords in California for discriminating again against the housing choice vouchers, housing choice voucher holders. So important for you to be on top of that and make sure, when somebody comes to you with that, you're not just blanketing. There was a period of time where people would just say, hey, we don't accept Section 8, and like even put it in their ads. We can't do that anymore, right? There's also a national organization called the National Fair Housing Alliance, and Redfin reached a settlement agreement to resolve fair housing lawsuit and expand housing opportunities in communities of color. So Redfin agreed to pay $4 million to settle a discrimination lawsuit that accused the real estate company of failing to provide brokerage services for homes that were listed below a certain price. And it was dubbed digital redlining. So again, even these online systems, can sometimes provide, uh, a digital redlining case. So, and oftentimes it may be the realtors who happen to see this, or their clients are getting, denied um, equal housing opportunities. So, if you see something, say something, speak up for them, encourage your client, to take the next step and at least find out what their rights are and see is this something that we can resolve? Because really that's what we want to make sure that people are understanding what their rights are and they're able to exercise those rights. Newsday published a multi-year investigation revealing racial steering by real estate agents in the New York area. So that was another big case that happened, where they were investigating steering with realtors. And gotta be, it's all I can say is, you gotta make sure that you're what I say is when people start asking you about houses and neighborhoods and schools and things like that, it's like, you can live where you can afford the property. Like that we can discriminate on, basically, right? You can't be looking at a $1 million property when you're only qualified for 600,000, right? Well, you can look at it, but you can't, you're not going to be able to apply, qualify for that loan. But, when it comes to neighborhoods, if people want to look in certain neighborhoods, that's their choice to look in those neighborhoods, and we shouldn't be steering them to certain neighborhoods. Um, Immigration status discrimination. The Fair Housing Foundation reached a settlement with a property owner who refused to rent to an individual based on their immigration status, they required the owner to implement a fair housing policy and undergo training to make sure that that didn't happen anymore. So, again, if you're going to ask for, uh, legal residency or whatever it is, you got to do that amongst all of your tenants, okay? Um, Other recent cases, there are some other recent cases, one involving an appraiser bias in property appraisals, and I told you a little bit about that one that was up in Northern California. And that, it ended up being a big case and really opened the door to individuals in the fair housing industry looking at those appraisals. So again, you as realtors are out there in the field, and if you see something, an appraisal that comes in that's unusually low, or you just feel like it's not right, it's worth it to investigate and do a little bit more digging. I know you can appeal the decisions too, but if you think it's based on their protected class, it's a good idea to contact us or your local fair housing agency to get more information and actually investigate it. You can also, I should say, the regulatory agencies are the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the California Civil Rights Department for the state of California. But then we also have fair housing organizations, like we work with Fair Housing Foundation. There's some other ones in the San Diego area. And so sometimes we will refer you over to the local agency as well. All right, some additional fair housing stats. In 2024, the Civil Rights Division sponsored a fair housing testing across LA and Ventura. Tests were completed with the Housing Rights Center, which is another fair housing organization, and they conducted more than 120 tests over the phone and 100 tests in person. So here are the findings from the properties subjected to testing. So they'll just go out there and do some testing and see if there's differential treatment. I have one tester you know, let's say source of income, one person who has a voucher, another person who has just regular wage income, and exactly the same profiles, and send them out and see if they get treated differently. So, in regards to source of income, of the 54 properties tested, 54% demonstrated discrimination based on the use of a housing assistance program, including explicit statements that Section 8 vouchers were not accepted. So, I've been doing housing for, like I said, over 20 years. And I remember, yeah, you could say no Section 8, like we're not qualified for Section 8. Um, well, we can't do that anymore, right? So you can't just have a blanket policy that you won't accept Section 8. Um, you have to, like I said, consider it, even if, if you're not accepting Section 8, you have to, get to the point where you can possibly use get, sometimes it's about getting the property qualified to meet Section 8 standards, and so whatever you have to do to do that, but you cannot say flatly blanket, we don't accept Section 8 or any kind of rental assistance. Okay. As I said, you got to have a policy that treats all sources of income the same. Familiar status. So of the 19 properties that were tested, 26% demonstrated evidence of discriminatory practices against prospective tenants with children, including instances of providers not offering available promotional rates or attempting to charge a higher rent. So, yeah, that's another one that we often see, is where they say, well, 3 adults living in this property would be this much, but 2 individuals with a kid would be charged a different rate because they think like kids are gonna have more wear and tear on the property or something. So you can't do that. That's having different policies for different types of individuals, and would be a form of discrimination. So in regards to race, of the 90 properties tested, 22% demonstrated discrimination based on the applicant's race, including instances of differential treatment against Black applicants with respect to credit score requirements and rental amounts. Again, got to have a policy, and it's got to be blanket across the board, treating everybody the same, regardless of their racial makeup. Disability. Of the 13 properties tested, 23% demonstrated discrimination based on the individual's disability, including outright denials to accommodate a request for a reasonable modification. So, if an individual needs a ramp put in the property, or handrails, they can request it, and it would be at their expense as long as it is a reasonably and doesn't cause an undue hardship to the property management. So even if you're not gonna, they're not gonna like the look of it, you got to allow it if they need it due to their disability. If they need to move their parking space closer to their property because they have a walking impairment, they put her in the request for an accommodation, it has to be granted as long as they need that because of their disability and they provide the documentation. So we work with the Fair Housing Foundation and other fair housing organizations. They have a whole form packet to submit. It's the written request, it includes a doctor's note. It tells them what exactly they have to go through. And if they put in that request for a modification or accommodation, it needs to be considered as long as it's reasonable, and it needs to be granted as long as it's based on the need for the disability. All right. In regards to criminal history, of the 32 properties tested, 44% demonstrated discrimination based on the individual's criminal history, including blanket bans, regardless of whether the conviction was connected to a specific housing concern. So again, that would be discrimination based on criminal history. So important to have policy procedures that these are our policies, procedures. This is how we evaluate your ability to rent or buy in this particular, area and enforce them consistently across the board. All right, we have a couple of little questions for you. You tell me, what do you think? Is this discrimination? A non-minority couple applies for a loan to purchase a home. The loan officer provides them with information on a number of eligible loan programs. Um, and then a minority couple also applies for a loan to purchase a home. The loan officer discusses only FHA financing. Would this be discrimination? What do you think? Put your answer in the chat for me. So you got a non-minority couple applying for a loan. They provide them with all of the eligible loan programs, whereas the minority couple only gets the FHA. What do you think? Would this be discrimination? Let's see. Yep, you're right. Good job. Yes. You have to provide them all. If you're providing all the loan options, FHA, conventional, down payment assistance, whatever it is, you provide it to everybody. Correct. All right. A home buyer asked their real estate agent, what is the ethnic makeup of the neighborhood where he is showing them properties? And the realtor refuses to answer the question due to the Fair Housing Act and instead asks the buyer to do some research before buying. Would this be considered discrimination? What do you think? Put it in the chat box. Correct. You guys got this down. No, no, that's actually the right answer, right? And maybe you've been asked this question and maybe you have a better answer to it. But what I say is, hey, when they ask you what kind of people live here, you say the people that can afford to live here, okay, that have met the qualifications and can afford to live here. And if they really do push you on it, then you can say, you know what, I'm not allowed to answer that under the Fair Housing Act. And I encourage you to do your research in the neighborhood, in the complex, come at different hours in the day, check it out and say, is this a neighborhood that I would like to live in? Okay. So, I would avoid questions in regards to that. There's also been a lot of questions in regards to schools and school districts, and that as a way of saying, is that a code word for, hey, this is a good neighborhood or not a good neighborhood? I would encourage you to encourage your buyers, do the research, go look and see. I mean, you know, check it out. See, is it a good school district? Is this someplace you would like to, send your kids? Do your research. It's going to be one of the biggest purchases they're going to make in their lifetime. I think it's important that they know about the neighborhood, the area, the schools, and they need to do their research to decide, is it the right place for them? All right, second question. A homeowner facing foreclosure calls a mortgage modification company and that he heard about on Spanish radio to save his home. The company promises him a modification for a fee, collects an upfront fee before providing the services, and says, don't make your mortgage payments or call your lender. We're going to help you. He never gets the loan mod and loses his home. Is this discrimination? What do you think? Put it in the chat box and let me know. And there's a lot of things going on in this. First of all, let's say it's an illegal thing going on because they're charging them an upfront fee, which is illegal. So, like I said, there's several things going on here, but yes, you're absolutely correct. It is discrimination because number one, they're only advertising on Spanish radio, right? To Spanish buyers. Then they called the individual, told him collected an upfront fee, which is also illegal, and then never provided any services, really made him go into foreclosure, and he ended up losing his home. So yes, that's definitely discrimination and a lot of other illegal things going on there as well. So foreclosure prevention services, free of charge, offered by HUD-approved housing counseling agencies like us, and nobody should be paying an upfront fee. But there are certainly people out there that are doing that kind of thing, and you got to be on the lookout for it. Sometimes we tell the client, if you can't afford modification, the best thing to do is to sell your home. And they don't like that answer. So then they go out searching for stuff and they're like, oh, I found this other agency that's going to help me home rescue or whatever, but they want $2,500. It's like, no, they're not going to get you any better answer. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box, and I'll be happy to get to your question and answer your question. But thank you for your participation. Appreciate that. And again, a lot of times it's the realtors and the people in the industry that tell us about these scams. So it's important that we're all working together to make sure that we're alleviating these kind of scams and wrong information that's out there. We are all working together to collaborate and try to make housing opportunities the best they can be and available to everyone. And what I would say is that, by educating yourself and ensuring fair housing opportunities, you're opening up, the process to all individuals and really opening up your market. So it's great that you're here with us today and sharing this information. And I encourage you to share it with your clients too, because they appreciate it too. It's a very daunting process to purchase a home, and what I tell them is you're going to need a realtor, you're going to need a lender, and when you find a good one, keep that one. And somebody who's going to share information and be honest with you if you're not ready to purchase and tell you to come get some counseling or whatever, improve your credit score. That's a good realtor and a good lender that you're going to want to work with, because they want to set you up for success. So, as I said, Homeownership OC is a nonprofit HUD-approved housing counseling agency. We work with our partner, the Fair Housing Foundation, and we want you to use us as a resource for yourselves and for your clients if they have fair housing questions or they just have home buying questions. We're happy to be a resource for all of you. You can send your clients to us. All of our services are provided free of charge. We help with credit if they need to bump up their credit score a little bit more. If they want to qualify for down payment assistance, they just have home buying questions, or maybe they're having trouble making their mortgage payments. We can help with that as well. We're happy to be invited out to your offices if you'd like to have us as a presenter and do some educational workshops like we're doing today. We also do home buyer workshops as well. We offer them in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic, and they're online and they're free. And we encourage clients to go through that process so they can educate themselves on what is really necessary to buy a home. We go through everything from A to Z, all the way from credit, savings, to the different types of loans, working with the realtor, all of the forms that you'll be filling out, and they really get educated on the whole process. We also include fair housing in there because we think it's important that they know about their fair housing rights and responsibilities. So encourage you to utilize us as a resource and send your clients if they need help. Here in Orange County, I think we have up to $120,000 in down payment assistance from the city of Santa Ana. I know the city of San Diego has, I think, $110,000 through the San Diego Housing Commission. There's lots of different down payment programs, and we are trying just as hard as you all to get people into home ownership. So a lot of people think that they can't do it. But with, I think, the education and a little help from some down payment and some of these first time buyer loans, they can actually get into it. Feel free to invite us for any kind of partnership opportunities, community fairs, events. It's a challenging market, but as I said, with collaboration, and I think, we can certainly help more people become homeowners. So how do you get connected with us? Just go to our website at homeownershipoc.org. For clients, they would complete an online intake form, and then they could sign up for our educational workshops as well. They can call us. You can email me. I put my information in the chat. We do refer clients over to Fair Housing if we feel like they need a little bit more information with or investigation of complaints. We'll work with them collaboratively. And as I say, we're very happy to be a resource for you all. Here's a flyer for our upcoming, or I should say, our on-demand home buyer workshops. As I said, we offer them. We're one of the few people that do offer these online on demand, so people can watch it from the comfort of their own home. And we do offer it in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic, because we don't want that to be a barrier to them accessing the information. It's very simple. Just go to the website, go to the events page, sign in, take the class. Then they'll have to fill out an intake form, meet with one of our counselors, and they're done. They get their certificate. Really easy to utilize, and it's of great value. Not only educationally, but could be up to 100 grand or whatever in down payment assistance, which can help people buy, which is always nice as well. All right, so what are the questions? We definitely have time for questions, and I want to hear from you all. What are your questions? What questions do you have for me? Let's see, I had a couple of questions come in. Let's see. Can a landlord or real estate agent refuse to show or rent a home to a family with children? So I think we kind of went over that. As we said, familial status is a protected class, so you can't say no children, okay? There is an exception in regards to that, and that would be any senior property with 55 or plus age requirement or 62 plus requirement. Of course, in those circumstances, yes, they can say no children, right? We're not going to rent to anybody with children, and there's an age requirement as well, but that's only for senior properties, properties that are designated as senior properties. So they do have to have that designation, 55 and older, 62, and whatever their age requirement is. They certainly can say no children. But again, if let's say, for instance, that person needs to move in a caregiver and that person's in their 40s, would they have to make an accommodation because that person needs a caregiver? Yes, right? So yes, that would be one instance where they would have to have make an accommodation, and the person could request that, hey, I need this caregiver, and this caregiver is under the age of 55. They would have to make that accommodation. All right, what other questions do y'all have? Let's see. Another question that came in is, a seller tells you that they don't want to sell their home to people from a certain country. What should you as a realtor do? Does anybody want to answer that for me? Like, what would you do in that circumstance if somebody says, hey, I don't like, those people from, let's say, whatever country, China, I'm not going to sell it to anybody from, China. In that circumstance, you just politely inform the seller that you cannot comply with that request. That, sorry, I can't. As a realtor, I'm legally and ethically bound not to discriminate, and it violates the fair housing law. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all offers and we're going to evaluate them equally, and you're going to make the best decision. Um, to sell your property to the person that most qualifies and meets those requirements. So, let's see. We got a question. So, all rental properties must qualify to receive vouchers as to not deny voucher applicants. Well, I would say yes. If you get that now, do you have to go out and make your property voucher ready or be applied and all of that? I don't think you would need to do that until you got the request. Um, and when you got the request, you could say, "Hey, we're in the process of getting um, certified to provide or to be able to accept rental vouchers, and that process may take 3 months. So if you're willing to wait that 3 month period, that's fine, right? Because you wouldn't be lying about it. But yes, and that's I guess a good question that I could ask our fair housing providers, like how that goes. But I think that in the past, that's question has come up, and that's how it was answered. It's like, I'm willing to consider yours, but just know that if I consider your application, I have to get the property qualified to meet the standards, and that process could take whatever, you know. So yes, I would look into that, and yes, yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, like I said, a lot of the fair housing cases that we're seeing is source of income. So I think in those circumstances, it was more of it wasn't a case of, hey, we're trying to accommodate you. It was more of, no, we don't accept Section 8, because we used to hear that all the time. I'm just gonna say, like, I've been in fair housing a long time, and people were like, no, we don't accept Section 8. We're not qualified. Well, if you're not going to do anything to get qualified, then you're never going to accept a Section 8. But if you got an actual applicant, and um, are following the process, then that's a whole different circumstances, because you are trying to comply with them. So I'll have to ask the question to our fair housing folks, as far as, as long as they're complying with it, I don't see that there'd be any issue with that. All right, other questions. Can you market a home using phrases like great for young professionals, perfect for a family? So, these are, although I know you're trying to, open it up to individuals. Like, it's not saying we wouldn't rent to somebody with a family, but you want to just steer clear of those kind of words that may be unintentionally providing a preference, right? So it's best to describe the attributes of the property, the neighborhood, um, so that individuals can make their own decisions, as far as, property value, great condition, this and that, versus stay away from the type of people that you may be looking at, renting or selling the property to. All right. Any other questions that you all have? You guys have been asking some really great questions. I appreciate your participation. And as I said, you're always welcome to reach out to us if you have a certain circumstance question. We're happy to, research the answer and get back to you. Um, let's see. So if let's say you witness something, your client tells you a story, it's important for you to follow through and encourage them to report it. A lot of times people don't want to report it, but that's the only way you get rid of the bad behavior. And it's not like people, these fair housing agencies are going out there looking for it. But if they find it, they're going to want to educate those individuals to make sure that they don't do it in the future, right? So it's about education and outreach and trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. So educating the industry to make sure that housing opportunities are available to everybody, as well as educating the consumers. So please feel free to share our information. Like I said, if you'd like flyers regarding our home buyer workshop that you'd like to give out to clients, I'm happy to send you out some. Feel free to use this as a resource. I'm here as well. My email's here, my phone number, homeownershipoc.org. I'm very happy to be a resource to you, and I want to thank you for joining us today.